I think I can look at my life paths of healing and see very much how my vocation, my bivocational path has grown out of that. Listening to the deeper currents of my life, I think once I became an Episcopal priest, I realized I had to be more rigorous about my own healing, that there were certain areas of my life that were no longer okay with me in their semi-healed or broken way.
Hi, and welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. My name is Ariane Rice, and I am thrilled you have joined me for today's conversation with my friend and colleague, Hugh Grant. And you just heard a snippet where he is sharing generously about his own journey of healing. Now, healing is not a word that we readily connect to leadership, but I have no doubt that one way we grow our leadership capacities is through our own healing. Healing work empowers and humbles us because we learn, I certainly have learned, the freeing truth that leadership begins with myself, with choosing to take full responsibility for my happiness, my well-being, what's in my heart, and my health. There are always going to be aspects beyond my control, but grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can. In her book, The Soul of Money, and I'm as surprised to be referencing a book titled that on this podcast as you might be to hear it. But in her book, author Lynn Twist writes, transformational leaders bring authentic presence, integrity, vision, compassion, expertise, and commitment to a higher purpose that awakens others to new possibilities and outcomes. All those descriptive words are capacities within ourselves. And what's another word for transformation? Healing. Transformational leaders are leaders who have experienced transformation within themselves. And so when you think about the times, the places, the experiences that have transformed you in your life and in your work, haven't some, if not all of those experiences also been healing? So if your work has you partnering with others in their transformation, I hope this conversation prompts some more reflection on your own and the learnings that you have integrated and the ways in which you now bring those forth for the sake of building other people up in love for their own transformation. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And now let's get to today's conversation. Good afternoon, Hugh Grant.
Hi there. It's still morning here on the Pacific Coast.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
It's morning and it's chillier than it is over here on the East Coast, isn't it?
It's about 58 degrees here.
Wow, 58.
We're having our second cloudy day of the last month.
Oh, well, we are having a rainy day here, which is actually kind of nice in Baltimore because July is pretty hot and pretty humid. So is this a work day for you? Is this a day off for you? What kind of day is this?
Mondays and Tuesdays are my day off.
Oh, so let's see. Maybe I'll ask you what you do in the world, how you live into your vocation, and how you like to take time off.
Nice. Let's see. So what I do in the world is I live in a beautiful place, Orcas Island, in the San Juan Islands off the Washington coast. I moved here with my husband, Berto, in 2013, and he became the rector of the local Episcopal church here. We moved here for his work, and it was a bit of a bumpy start for me because I didn't know exactly what I would be doing. I was doing some retreats in the wilderness at that time and fancied myself doing that. But the big ramp up towards an intensive 5-day or week-long program, followed by the recuperation and then planning for something else, didn't really suit my personality. I think I'm more of a day-to-day routine kind of person. And they needed therapists here. So I moved my clinical social work license, which I had gotten before becoming a priest in the Episcopal Church. I had that transferred to Washington and started a psychotherapy practice. And around maybe a couple of years after that, the church here hired me as Berto's very part-time assistant. So I'm really lucky to be in a beautiful place doing both of my career paths as a psychotherapist and as a Episcopal priest. My role at the church is mostly pastoral care and worship on Sunday, so I don't have to do any of the more onerous tasks of the priesthood, like making sure there's a roof and the electricity stays on. But in my psychotherapy practice, I work with adults and I have a little office in town. During the pandemic, I realized that my training felt old to me, and that with all the things we've learned about trauma in the last couple of decades since I studied clinical social work, that there was more that I needed to learn. And I heard Bessel van der Kolk talking about how your clients like you and they feel better because they're talking to you, but you're not helping them with their symptoms. And that really felt like an altar call to me. So,
Wow.
yeah, I decided to research different therapy modalities. I decided to specialize in internal family systems, IFS, which is sometimes called parts work, and then EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and somatic experiencing. So those are my three lenses.
Okay, so I love that you referred to it as an altar call, right? Because that's like the other professional way.
I threw that out for you.
Oh, I know. No, I love that. And what was it about that felt like an altar call?
He just made a lot of room for the awareness that you can be doing a good job as a therapist and your clients like you, and without being blaming or criticizing the way said therapist might be doing their work, that often clients feel better, but the symptoms they come with are not being treated. And I thought of my clients who have a lot of trauma in their background, and that despite the progress we have made, that that way of looking at a client's story really just resonated with me. I thought, wow, they still have this symptom and that symptom. And in that way, they're not getting better. And I owe it to them to get more training.
Sometimes when I think of training that works faster, I think that it's going to be more behavioral focused.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Internal family systems is not behaviorally focused. It does tend to work faster because the therapist is not really so much the expert as much as they are a learned and accomplished guide into a certain way of understanding the inner world of a human being in such a way that one can access their own healing potential, their own power to be healing to themselves, and to specifically do that through unburdening different parts of our personality that have different roles and are often really overburdened with doing things in a particular way.
I think I had said to you earlier, the word unburdened, I just love so much in thinking about a therapeutic process. And also because it's such a key word in our faith and in scripture.
Yes, I know. That's one of my favorite passages in the Bible is when Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
Yep. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because one of the things you and I share is we live our vocation in at least two different ways. You as a therapist and priest, me as a priest and leadership coach. And I am starting to see this more and more with clergy colleagues for certain. And also, I know why I've gone into doing other things that are outside the church. And I'm very curious to know why other people do. So
Mhm.
can you just say a little bit about the both and experience and how that is vocationally filling for you?
Yeah, some of it is circumstantial for me. I imagined coming back to psychotherapy as a career path, maybe as a retired priest. But when we moved to Orcas Island, which is a one Episcopal parish town, and I knew there would just be room for one priest, I was really interested in doing retreat work because of some deep healing experiences I had had being guided in the wilderness. And that was my game plan originally, to learn more about how to do that and to do it. In the first couple of years, I did do that. So I was kind of in the third career mode. And like I mentioned before, it didn't suit my personality style. I don't know if it's personality style the right way of saying that. It didn't suit my constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So the therapy career path opened up as a way to make a living and have a fruitful life here on Orcas alongside Berto doing his work. And for a couple of years, it was just that because I didn't want to work. We were a little bit hesitant to
Well,
work in the same
yeah, I
place.
want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I liked doing the clergy spouse role and having freedom to be as involved as I wanted to or uninvolved as I wanted to. But interestingly enough, I was invited back to St. Luke's in New York City, where I had served for 5 years as an assistant. And I was invited to preach at a funeral. And I was so blown away by the reconnections I made with several parishioners and how much those relationships meant to me. And what a beautiful life it was there in that parish with those people. And I left New York just sorely missing being a priest. And I told Berto that I would really like to be on staff in any way,
Mm-hmm.
non-stipendiary, whatever. And the vestry was really into it. And that's what we decided to do.
I'm going to make the assumption that you guys had some pretty, maybe not intensive, but some pretty important conversations around how you would do that together as a married couple and him technically as your boss.
Yeah, probably we should have had some more discussions, but I say that sort of half jokingly
I
because
know.
we've had very little friction or obstacles with it because my role is so part-time and prescribed. I don't go to vestry meetings. I don't participate in a lot of what happens at the staff level in the parish or even the leadership level of vestry, that kind of thing. But I do lead worship, and I organize the pastoral care with the lay people who are involved in that. So that kind of happened naturally. And Berto's just really a collaborative leader. If anything, I've wanted him to be more bossy. Tell me what to do. What?
He's too much of this type of person. What do you think?
Yeah. Don't you want to do that? No, I'm not sure I want to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's one of those things that I had really no idea about before I worked in a parish. When you're the rector and in charge, just how much more vast your responsibility is for operational staff and how incredibly beyond draining that can be at certain times.
Yeah. Exactly.
In coaching, things come up because it is more behaviorally focused, because it definitely is focused on achieving certain goals that the client has in a set period of time that are external for the most part. Although there also has to do with internal capacities for how to navigate their professional career and vocational calling. However, oftentimes in doing that work, things will come up where there's probably a deeper story here, and there probably would be an opportunity, if you want, to work with the therapist to uncover more about what this emotion is about.
Mhm.
And so both therapy and coaching, in a way, are working with, it's not a pastoral relationship, but it is a relational type of work.
Absolutely.
On one hand, it's so obvious what you can't do in church versus what you can do in therapy and vice versa.
Mhm.
But how does that live? How do doing these two things live into our calling?
Yeah, that's a great question. People say sometimes that it would be harder to know when you're doing psychotherapy or maybe coaching and when you're doing pastoral care. I find it maybe easier because I have the training in both, and I'm really clear when I'm in a counseling role. And yeah, I think the reason I'm pausing so much is because I work in this small island and there's so many dual relationships here.
Mm-hmm.
My clients at the grocery store, I see some of them come to church sometimes. So I'll be preaching and looking out, and there's a client. And so we chat at coffee hour, and it is a little fuzzy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But probably like you, my experience is that the prescribed amount of time that you have with a client in a session really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
When you're as a priest with someone, if they make an appointment with you to come and talk about something, that you're doing pastoral care.
Yes.
So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Well, it does. And
no answer.
well, and you use the word training. And in truth, I don't want to say this in any way that's like diminishing the training we get as clergy, but our training is it's about tradition. We're learning a tradition, we're learning a style, we're learning a way to preside and preach. We're not really learning all the time how to navigate different congregations, because in some ways that's really only something you can learn on the job. To me, therapists, and in some ways even coaching, seem to have a lot more, what's it called, like a practicum, a lot more time that's considered training, but you're doing the work, but it's considered training. And or you're receiving the work, but it's considered training. Like you are the coaching client or you are the therapy client, and it's part of your training. Priests don't have that.
No, and in the church is wise to counsel folks to not do more than 3 pastoral care sessions. I think that rule comes mostly from Safe Church guidelines to not have a special relationship with a parishioner that might become questionable in its intensity. I think also that if you don't have training doing pastoral care beyond just the one class we take that sort of may or may not have a lot of content around how to be with someone and ask open-ended questions and to be able to listen for certain warning signs that might indicate some kind of mental health challenge. Without those tools, someone's just going to be in better hands with somebody who has training.
Mm-hmm. And sadly, sometimes the priest is the only person that can find, right? There's not enough therapists to talk to. There's a lot of other barriers to getting therapy.
Exactly, which is conversely why those 3 sessions
Matter
a lot,
mm-hmm.
because alongside our training, or our training is really based on the relationship anyway. So often people say it's the relationship that heals, which
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, so that's amazing that you just said that, because the question that was forming in my mind had to do with how our vocations heal us. Which for me, that has everything to do with why I'm a priest, why I facilitate the work of Brene Brown, and why I coach. Because all of the work I've received, all of my preaching, all of my teaching, all of my coaching is also work that has healed me.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, how does that question land?
Yeah, it lands with a lot of resonance. I think I can look at my life paths of healing and see very much how my vocation my bivocational path has grown out of that. I had huge experiences of healing and therapy at punctuated moments as a young person. I think the first time I went to therapy was when I was 17. And I just had a couple of sessions where a psychiatrist that was my mom's psychiatrist actually just helped me really unlock something I had been struggling with around the death of a family member earlier in my life that was really difficult for me. So I knew that therapy was something really helpful. And I sought it again later as a young man struggling with his sexuality. And then I discovered Jungian analysis when I was in my 30s and spent 10 plus years in Jungian analysis and had two very strong relationships, and one in Atlanta and one in New York City with Jungian analysts. And that really took me on a deep path of healing that opened up through following my dreams, listening to my dreams, listening to the deeper currents of my life, realizing that I wanted to be an Episcopal priest. I think once I became an Episcopal priest, I realized I had to be more rigorous about my own healing, that there were certain areas of my life that were no longer okay with me in their semi-healed or broken way.
So first, you use the most beautiful language, Hugh, and like your metaphors, you're so lovely. When I started listening to the deeper currents in my life, and that immediately just makes me think again about how everything in Jesus' Bible talk is around living waters. And this idea that living waters, as opposed to the kind of water that sat in a cistern or that didn't have life because it would just sit there. I remember learning that in one of our classes. Whereas living waters, they flow and they're moving and they're fresh, and tears are living waters. And I love that thought of listening to the deeper currents. And then I love and resonate with the idea that in order to do, I don't want to say the best job I can do as a priest, but certainly maybe the most authentic, maybe the one with the most integrity, certainly the one with the most love. It is my responsibility to take care of myself and to figure out where I need healing. Can you just say more about that? Because frankly, I don't think everybody follows that rubric.
Maybe they're not as tortured as we are.
Maybe.
Yeah. Wow. Wait, so the question is around my personal experiences of that?
Yeah, I can tell you if you want me to a little bit. I grew up as an adult child of an alcoholic, the eldest of three, and in a very traumatic and chaotic system. And when I was going through my process to be approved to go to seminary and to be a postulant, I was asked very directly by a priest who had been in recovery for a long time. And he just asked me the question 3 or 4 times saying, what are you going to do when the person comes to you and they're struggling with addiction? And I said, answer after answer. And he just kept saying the question because I wasn't being honest about how that was going to trigger so much for me. So when I started seminary, I was like, I have to get a therapist and I have to have them tell me how to deal with this. And that's why I went to therapy, because I was going to learn the tools so I could deal with that. And then slowly began to realize, oh, Ariane, it's not about some external tool. It's about doing your own healing work because of who you are and where you've come from. And that's, by the way, healing work that never, ever stops. Everybody can remember that. Yeah.
It keeps that water flowing.
It does. So in that kind of vein, what?
I think it wasn't until I started meditating and getting quiet in my life and becoming a little bit less self-focused and more involved in my community that I thought of being a priest in the first place. So that was maybe from the reverse direction that my life started opening up in a way that I felt like I could step into the priesthood. I don't think I would have considered that before. As I studied to become a priest and then became a priest, it became clear to me that my relationship with alcohol and cannabis were problematic for me. And so I went through a years long process of struggling with that. And as a therapist, having people come to me struggling with addiction and knowing that I had some version of that struggle myself, and believing pretty strongly that it's really hard to be an effective guide to someone if you haven't learned the thing that they need to learn, or that you suspect that they're in the process of learning. So that became an impetus to deeper healing in that arena of my life. And so I began life as a sober person about 6 years ago. And that was my own sort of quiet journey and path. And at the time, I had a story about it that was more along the lines of, I realized it was problematic for me and I wanted to be in integrity with my work, which was a true story. But the truer story is that it had become quite a private struggle for me and took up so much brain space. So through my work was inspired and motivated to get healing. And I think also just becoming I want to say a better human being, or more, maybe more of a human being, more of a follower of Christ. I had an experience recently with a parishioner who, I think I hurt her feelings because I was pointing out to her that she didn't need to say a blessing over the person who wasn't going to take the chalice. She liked to say a long involved blessing. And in our training, that's like not something that is encouraged. And there's this idea that only priests can give blessings, which is pretty ridiculous. So Berto called me out he said, I think you hurt her feelings, and I don't mind if she says a blessing. And I was glad to have that pointed out to me. I realized I don't want to be someone who's nitpicking the beauty of a layperson who's wanting to say a blessing over someone. Like,
it's a very, okay, but yes, and it's very hard.
Yeah, I understand that. I had the luxury of having it not be so hard because I'm not in charge. And I have to say, some of those hard calls, I watched the way Berto does his ministry, and he's very involved. He knows that many things that a lot of priests get really tense about are not worth the battle. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to spend a little time here. We recently had a clergy gathering, and we've started with a new bishop in this diocese, and all wonderful, all good. And we were having a very general discussion about a variety of topics. And wow, was there energy around the renewal of vows. And I'm speaking as if everybody knows what I'm talking about. Once a year, clergy have an opportunity to renew their vows. And it's a very meaningful service for many of us. And
their ordination vows.
Yes, exactly. Our ordination vows. And there was a lot of discussion around, can we renew our ordination vows with Lutherans? Because Lutherans and Episcopalians are in full communion. Is it okay to have laity there from the congregation? No, some people don't want laity there. Like, it's just supposed to be for the priests. And there's something very special about just being with the priests. And on the one hand, some of us, myself included, were getting frustrated that so much time was being spent on this, in some ways, meaningless conversation. But at the same time, recognizing in my own heart the tremendous meaning I have when I am with only clergy, because only clergy can understand the depth of those vows. And I have been in so many situations where people are doing some version of something I was taught or some rubric in a prayer book that isn't necessarily completely on point. And there's the both and of, you're breaking the rules. This isn't supposed to be the way. And can't we just do what we're supposed to do? But also, who cares? Who cares? Jesus doesn't care. God doesn't care. Right. What's in your heart when you do it?
That's right. That's right. And I think that you could maybe look at spiritual growth through the lens of holding at one end of the spectrum. It's supposed to be this way. It's not supposed to be that way. And on the other end of the spectrum, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. It's a beautiful paradox.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's not even a paradox. It's just like spiritual growth, because some of those things actually don't matter. And we still think they do. And I think if we are going to continue in relevance as the church, that we're going to need to let go a lot of things that don't resonate with folks anymore.
They don't resonate. I was having another conversation with somebody who's not in the priesthood, and he served in his first career in the military. And we were talking about the need early on for some of us to choose a career path that was very rigid in structure. And as I was reflecting in my editing of the conversation, I thought, it's really like you need the obedience. We say a vow of obedience, and you need that obedience in order to move into this place of giving yourself permission, as opposed to always seeking external permission and approval.
Well said. Yes, I agree.
And that's one of the reasons why the healing work never stops, because this is true, I think, in all lines of work. We're all acting out our stuff in any line of work we have. But because of the nature of the familial-esque type of work in a parish, it really comes up to the surface. And also because, in a way, this is a saying in nonprofit work, like, it matters a great deal because it really doesn't matter at all. There's no bottom line. There is in every other line of work, which is where we really assign validity in this society, right?
I was going to say, it sounds like a pleasant version of that saying, the politics are so vicious because the stakes are so small.
Exactly. That's a way better way. That's a better quote.
No, I think your way is much better, because that one, do we really need to use the word vicious? I don't know.
Oh, it can get pretty vicious in the church.
It can, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say that I think you asked the question about the vocation of being human when we talked another time. And I think that brings to mind for me something about just living out of the highest values that we profess. And so I just want to say that the experience we're talking about of continuing to grow because of vows we've made or vocational paths that we've chosen, that's available to anybody who's a commitment to anything, especially out of any kind of ethical, moral, or value system. So if we listen to what we say we believe in, and we take that seriously, there's always so much potential for growth in that.
So one of the things you and I have talked about in the 15 years of our friendship is this cyclical nature of learning. It's like we get back to this place and we're like, damn, how do I need to learn this again? Like Sunday's reading at church was, come away and rest a while, Jesus saying to the disciples. And it's like, how many times do I have to learn that I have to go away and rest a while? It's so profound every time I do.
And our last conversation comes to mind for me, because we had to take one of this conversation, and I'm really grateful for a redo, because I realized that in answering your questions in an honest way, I realized that my honesty was infused with a lot of cynicism that I wasn't aware had either crept back in or was newly available to me to understand that it was there. Yeah, I found myself critical of a lot of concepts and ways of describing human growth. And after our subsequent conversation, I really thought, gosh, Hugh, do you want to be someone who's critiquing anything about the way people who are trying to live a better life or bring light into the world? Do you really need to be critiquing any of that when there's so much negativity and cynicism in the world?
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
So cynicism, criticism, sarcasm, that was That was the currency in the house I grew up in. That was the currency that also kept me protected, that also helped me thrive in certain environments. Frankly, in some ways, that was the currency that I found a little bit in seminary. And just the other day, I was in a emotional intelligence course I was completing, and found myself saying to this cohort group, in terms of most important things you learned, I was like, it's really important to be tenderhearted. Everybody's having a really hard time.
Yes.
And sometimes I say these things, and it's, first of all, who are you, Ariane? When did you become this person? And is this real? And because in
What do you
some ways,
mean, is it real?
this, not to turn this into my therapy session with Dr. Grant, but the cynicism was for so long so effortless and so easy. And in some ways, when I'm not in a great place, I can return to it pretty quickly, especially with the people closest to me, of course, and especially with my own internal critic. But as I keep growing and healing in my own way, I just don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I do all of a sudden, like you're describing, come into this place of a wake-up call, I'm like, I don't want to do this. There's limited time.
That's right. Yeah. And it's such a relief to finally get to a point where you realize you just don't want to do that anymore, versus, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. Because sometimes in my experience, I've thought, oh, I shouldn't be indulging in this critical conversation, but I haven't quite gotten to the I don't want to yet, for whatever reason. And there's moments where we're graced with realizing we don't have to and we don't want to. And those are moments to seize.
They sure are. Yeah, that to me is the vocation of being human. And that's, that's why it doesn't matter what language you use to follow Jesus. It doesn't matter if absolutely no scripture at all, if you have no idea what to go do in church, if you don't go to church, although I love church and think going to church is incredibly valuable, and being a part of a community that engages in these sacred rituals.
I think when you first said there's so many ways to follow Jesus, and then as you kept describing the way that can look, you talk about celebrating life, following life. I think embedded in that is walking a path of love, being willing to grieve, and have our hearts ripped open. That following Jesus is just one specific way of talking about letting all of that happen, which is available to human beings through lots of different paths. And I think at a time where we have less community and less rituals in our culture, that these are things that the church can really offer. And we need to get out of the exclusivity business, or be even more proactive about articulating a non-exclusivity or primacy of our belief system, because those bigger currents of living a life of vulnerability and authenticity and dedicating ourselves to principles that we strive for but don't come naturally to us, or it feels like they don't. Yeah.
What are some of the ways that your finding joy has changed with the healing work you've done, if it has at all?
I think that earlier in my life, finding joy meant having moments that were infused with aliveness or a certain euphoria or excitement that was a welcome relief for me from a sort of low note of melancholy and sense of drudgery about life. So I think I was in many ways getting through life. And I remember the rector of the church I became Episcopalian and saying one time, oh, people talk about reincarnation. I don't want to believe in reincarnation. I don't want to do this again. It's so hard. And that's a true story. And it really stuck with me as was really glad to hear him talk about how hard he found life, because I really found life very hard. And I think if we're experiencing life as hard in a way that means that our kind of basic experience is getting through it, that only thing that can really penetrate that is a particular kind of joy that's like a shot of adrenaline or something. That, at least that was the case for me. I find that as I've been graced with deeper healing, that I find joy in just waking up in the morning and feeling grateful for where I live. And it's a quiet state of being, and it doesn't have a lot of fizz sometimes. It's just
I love that.
yeah, I think I would have thought it was boring before, but it can be such a relief to not have an undercurrent of despair. Mm-hmm. That's my current experience of joy, which
I mean, I love that, because I don't think joy is always chasing the high, whatever that high might mean, right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's very hard to get comfortable enough with ourselves to enjoy the quiet of just being and the joy of staring at a beautiful tree or watching a sunset. Some of them are more aesthetically pleasing or quote unquote beautiful. Mm-hmm. But I know, like, I was thinking about Luna and your dog and
Ava.
No, Ava. I always do that. I always want to call her Luna.
She had a Luna vibe.
That's right. But how much you just love her.
I know. She was the most amazing dog.
That's one of the areas where my heart's gotten a lot more tender. Oh my gosh, I used to be so cynical of people with their pets.
No, pets, as a friend of mine once said, nothing throws open the gates of the heart like a relationship with a pet.
So true.
If you are wired that way to take joy in the companionship of an animal, it is very true. They're very good teachers.
Hugh, I think this has been a pretty beautifully quiet conversation. What do you think? How are you feeling about this conversation?
I feel great about this conversation. I feel grateful to you for inviting me back. I feel grateful to you for telling me how our first conversation landed with you and for what I learned from that. So it's helped me up my game or clean up my act or flow with that living water or flush out the stagnant well or whatever the metaphor is. And that's just part of the wild, unexpected nature of the way things happen in our life. So
wow.
I'm a fan of this conversation. For me, it's a moment of where I can feel something new that God's doing in my life.
I'm very grateful and humbled and really grateful that you came back and we recorded again. And who knows, maybe there will be conversation number 3.
Wow. Oh, exactly. Yes, we always have to count the first one, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, that's important.
All right, my friend, enjoy the beauty of where you are. And until next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Ariane.